I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. And today with me I have Jamey Stegmaier from Stonemaier Games to talk about Wyrmspan. How are you doing, Jamey?
I'm doing well. It's surreal because I hear you say that little snippet at the beginning of every one of your videos, but I never have gotten to hear it live in real time. So this is an honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely, yeah. We just talked about this right before the call, but we've had a million interactions from email, conversations on live streams, but this is actually our first direct actual call or talk. But speaking of which, you don't go to a lot of conventions, do you? You go to a few, but not a ton.
Yeah, I mainly go to Geekway to the West here in St. Louis, and we host a little mini playtesting pub style convention called
Nice.
the Stonemaier Games Design Day. But I haven't been to Gen Con in years. You host your own. Last couple of years, you've hosted your own
Yeah.
convention, right? How's that going?
Level Up Retreat. It's going to be It's going to be shortly, February 2nd to 4th. It's an interesting experience. We're trying something. It's interesting. It's interesting. It's funny because going to a convention is almost easy. Running a convention is so much work in the back end that it's a whole lot more than I signed up for. But it's I'm enjoying. There is a sense of satisfaction when it's all done. There's a sense of oh, this was not just a convention. It was my convention. Yeah.
Right.
But yeah.
Was that your idea, or did someone come to you and say, "Hey, I think your audience would be interested in this"?
I have a friend who's in the board game space
Okay.
who he decided to partner up with me to do this because it's more his jam as far as the type of thing, and for me it's more of it's something that it was an opportunity that I don't think I would initiate on my own. So I was like, you know what, let's go ahead and see how this goes and try it out. But yeah. So, anyways, let's focus on Wyrmspan for a bit, because Wyrmspan has been taking, I think, everything by storm, as tends to happen with most of your announcements from Stonemaier Games, but I think Wyrmspan is a extra level of excitement.
It is an extra level, I think. The combination of the designer is Connie Vogelman, who
Yep.
worked on Apiary, which is probably our hottest game from the last year. Definitely trumped my own game from last year, which I'm happy to see it do.
It did better than Expeditions?
In terms of critical ratings, I think so. Yeah,
Okay.
I've seen Apiary on quite a few top 10 lists of the year. Expeditions has been on a few of them, but I'm happy to see Apiary thrive, especially since it's Connie's first design, and Wingspan. It's coming off the backs of Wingspan. So yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. So I guess it's a good natural segment too. I guess my first question is, I'm curious, how did that happen? Because I mean, you have a lot of people you work with in different ways, but I don't know if and maybe I just haven't tracked a ton of it or whatnot. But past yourself, I haven't seen a ton of similar designers being repeated. And then you had two back to back. You had Connie doing Apiary and then Wyrmspan. How did that come about?
Well, yeah, and the timing ends up being a little weird because Apiary came out just a few months ago. We're announcing Wyrmspan. There was a bigger gap than the 3 months for what actually went into the work of it, because Connie spent a couple years working on Apiary. I saw how awesome Connie was to work with, how talented she is as a designer. She's great at communicating. I love someone who can email back and forth quickly. And Connie's great at doing that. And she's also a great dedicated playtester. She just playtests all the time with her partner and a variety of other people in the DC area. So all those traits I really liked. And I was when I find someone that I like to work with, I want to work with them more often. And so when we had internally the idea of doing something else for Wingspan beyond just birds, Connie was really the first person who came to mind for it.
Interesting.
Other than Elizabeth. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So this came not from Connie initially. This came more from a different direction.
Yeah, it came from some internal discussions about we had this game, this Wingspan brand that people seem to really enjoy. They are comfortable with this, what Elizabeth created with Wingspan. But we get a lot of requests from Wingspan fans about doing something with other creatures. We've got so many different types of animals requested. And so we discussed it internally and thought, why don't we try out dragons as a more complex version of Wingspan? Now we have to find the right person to design it. I thought about maybe doing it, but I'd rather, Wingspan, one of the great things about Wingspan is that there are 3 amazing women on the cover who helped create the game, Elizabeth and the artist. And we thought, why don't we try to find an amazing woman designer who could do this?
Interesting.
And yeah.
And how was Elizabeth's take on on having her? Because I know Elizabeth's involved; she's the developer of the game. But how was her overall take to this? Having her creation put into another medium, effectively not medium, but theme.
Yeah. I floated the idea to Elizabeth when we were talking about it, and I let her know that I was gonna work with Connie to come up with a pitch. So Connie and I worked on a pitch of what the game could be, and we pitched that to Elizabeth and at that point, honestly, if Elizabeth had said, no, I'm not into that, we wouldn't have done it. I really want Elizabeth's buy-in on everything Wingspan created that we make. But Elizabeth was into it, and she was willing to sign up as the developer for the game to help make the game as fun and balanced and intuitive and functional as possible. And fortunately, she's local to Connie, so Connie and her can actually get together and play the game together and play test and talk about the game together.
Perfect. And so going into the actual games themselves, so I know Wingspan, I know Wyrmspan builds off of some of the similarities of Wingspan, while very much being its own beast, its own entity. I know there's been a lot of people who are like, oh, retheme, sell games and whatnot, and like not actually acknowledging the fact of how much work went into it, how much differences there are. But speaking to some of those differences, what are the key differences that you would pitch as far as the main things that separate those two games? The main things that are, I guess, from a similarity stance, what are the main things that are similar, what are the main things that are different? And also worth noting to anyone who wants a deeper dive in this, I believe you have done a full video breakdown on your channel on this.
I have, yeah. There's a Wyrmspan versus Wingspan video where I talk about a lot of the differences. The core similarities are just that there's 183 different dragon cards. There are 180 different bird cards in Wingspan. So a vast variety of cards that you're playing into a tableau that gets better and stronger as you play. Kind of the main differences in Wyrmspan, and there are lots of like little things, but I would say the 4 or 5 main ones. I'll mention them real quick. One, there are cave cards, a card type that isn't in Wingspan at all, where you have to play a cave card to kind of excavate this cave so a dragon can live there, a dragon can be there. So whole different set of cards. They're all when played abilities. We have these hatchling dragons. So they're shuffled into the dragon deck. They're dragons, but it's a whole new type of mechanism in the game where you're kind of feeding these little baby dragons until they grow up and give you one big powerful ability. They're giving you little bonuses along the way. I really, really like that element. The player mats are designed a little bit differently in that you're activating from left to right instead of right to left. And so instead of getting like one core benefit and then activating the dragons, you're getting an increasing number of little benefits along the way based on how many dragons you've played into that player mat. And at the end, there's some pretty powerful benefits on the player mat as well. And then the Dragon Guild. This is probably my favorite part of it, although I love the hatchlings too. But the Dragon Guild is a new, let's see if we can get that to focus. There we go. It's a new track where you can move around this track and gain little benefits. And in the middle of this board is a slightly different tile that you can put into the game every time you play. There are 4 different Dragon Guilds where you gain powerful one-time benefits that are unique to that guild and some endgame abilities.
And the Dragon Guilds are per game, not per player.
They're per game, exactly. Yeah, everyone's interacting with the same Dragon Guild, kind of fighting over a limited number of powerful spaces on the Dragon Guild.
How does feeding the hatchlings work? Literally just giving them food?
Yeah, you're kind of, as you walk down one of your caves, as you're exploring one of the caves, a hatchling might want meat. And so if you have a meat in your supply, you can just give that hatchling a little meat, and they'll spit out a crystal or something like that, depending on the dragon. And then once you've put 3, in this example, 3 meat on that dragon, it grows up. And it gives you a one-time powerful benefit.
Perfect. And I know you also, one of the other changes I noticed was that you got rid of the randomness of the food, the no dice. There's just whatever food you want.
Yeah, that's a big change. Yeah, we found this is a slightly more complex version than Wingspan, and giving players a little extra agency over that sort of thing. It does remove an interaction. That's an aspect of player interaction in Wingspan, but I think it worked out for the best to remove that in Wyrmspan.
Which I guess, speaking of complexity, is a good tangent, I guess, the next one, which is, as far as target audiences, like, who is Wyrmspan for? Who is it not for? Especially when you're thinking of that Wingspan audience or the Stegmaier audience in general. Who are you targeting with this game?
That's a great question. We try to think about that for every game, and this is a particular puzzle for that because we wanted it to appeal. We wanted it to be familiar enough to people who know Wingspan that if they liked the dragon theme, they might want to try it. We're close to now 2 million copies of Wingspan in circulation. So it's a pretty big audience of people who are familiar with the game, who own the game at least. So we wanted to appeal to that audience, the potential of that audience, but we also wanted to reach people who maybe have dismissed Wingspan because of the theme. Maybe they just aren't interested in nature or bird themed games.
Which, going back to the original 10,000 print run copy, was a big concern back in the day.
Exactly. Yeah, we had no idea that it would take off the way it did. So appealing to maybe that hobby market a little bit more, people who like fantasy themes, sci-fi themes. They're not going to find dragons fighting other dragons here or people slaying dragons like you might see in some of the dungeon crawlers you play. So if they're looking for that, that isn't this game. But the dragon theme is deeply ingrained into the mechanisms of the game.
Yeah. Speaking of print runs, I mean, Wingspan is obviously a most popular title. I saw you're in your blog post or somewhere. I read and watch a lot of your stuff, so I never know which thing I'm up to. But you mentioned that this is a print run of 100,000. Is this your largest print run to date? Initial print run?
It is, yeah. Yeah, it's our largest first printing of a game ever. I think we have done some reprints of Wingspan that are around 100,000 copies.
Really?
And
Wow. That's
yeah,
insane for like a reprinting. Did it? And this
yeah,
is one of those questions where I kind of know the answer before I ask, but I'm more
okay,
intrigued in the thought process than the answer,
yeah.
which is I should phrase it, I assume the answer, but you've obviously started on crowdfunding. You had a big presence on crowdfunding. You eventually moved over. Now you have your whole Stegmaier's champions. You do everything in pre-orders. So you believe in that, product market fit, the finding the audience, but you do so in a different way that you think is a better fit for you, for your audience.
Yeah.
Did you at all occur to you to potentially do crowdfunding with this title?
It's it
I got
crossed
so
my
go ahead.
mind and it crossed our mind. I mean, even last year with Expeditions,
Yeah.
we didn't exactly crowdfund it, but I announced it when we went into early production so that we could change that print run quantity if we were way off. And we were off. There was more demand for it than we thought, and that was based off another Scythe,
Scythe.
one of our second most popular game. Yeah. So um, we talked about using that same reasoning for Wyrmspan and doing something similar, but I think we were a little bit more confident in a giant number for Wyrmspan than we were even for Expeditions, and so we were like, let's just risk it. So we'll put a lot of money out there, invest in 100,000 copies, and hopefully we'll meet first run demand.
Yeah.
And yeah, hopefully it
Yeah.
works out.
Because like I've read a lot of your posts over the years, and I understand the reasons to avoid crowdfunding. I understand why it works for
Yeah,
many, and I understand that if you found yourself in a position where you don't need it, then I mean like it can very well be better. I think what you're doing for Stegmaier from the outset, obviously from my own 2 cents, I think it's incredible and it works well. But there's also that magical appeal of could this be the most crowdfunded game of all time? Like that's genuinely like
yeah.
it genuinely could. Would it? I don't know, but like 100,000 copies. What's the MSRP on it?
It's in the Wingspan range.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
So
60ish.
between 60 and 70. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're talking about potentially 6 million. That's assuming you match demand, forget the hype and buzz and all that. It could be anything. So I'm always like, to me, it's like that
Yeah.
aspect. There's an additional level. There's some renown to a title being the most crowdfunded game of all time, the highest rating on BGG, being the best in anything
Yeah.
brings a long-term pitch to it that to me, I kind of wonder like, how tempting is that versus, the acknowledgement that you found something that works for you versus crowdfunding.
That's a fair point. Yeah, I mean, we saw that with does Frosthaven still have it?
Frosted still has it, yeah. I think Nemesis just came close.
They
Nemesis
came
got
very
to
close.
12.3 or something like that. I think it was the third highest, and then there's right under Kingdom of Death, which is Frosthaven's just a little over.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a neat thing. I think that's not only a neat thing for those companies, but also for the people who are backers of those
Yeah.
campaigns. They got to feel that they were part of one of the biggest campaigns ever. So I totally see that point too. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm just curious. Yeah, but either way, but 100,000 is insane. I'm very curious how this one does overall for you. But with you doing this with Expeditions, Expeditions from Scythe and Wyrmspan from
Yeah.
Wingspan, like, are there plans for other, variant games or offshoot games or sequel games within your company?
Well, yeah, when we had this discussion internally about should we do spin-offs, and if we do, the idea that we thought about, I don't want to get too far into spoilers, but I want to be honest with you here. So we talked about doing one that's more complex than Wingspan, that's Wyrmspan, and doing one that is a little bit less complex than Wingspan, and that is another one that we're working on that should come out hopefully in 2025 if all goes well.
Cool. Well,
Yeah.
that's intriguing. I'm intrigued by that one. And I guess speaking of, and feel free to say no comment or
Yeah.
whatever to anything, but like as far as expansion content for for Wyrmspan, I have to assume that the possibilities are there. But is that something that's already in the works, or that's something that you're waiting and seeing? How's expansion? What are the expansion plans like?
I mean, yeah, for the most part, for us, for expansions, we kind of take a break while a game is in production. I take a break as a designer. I really encourage our designers to take a break too, focus on other projects. And we did have something else that we wanted Connie to work on, or that we asked Connie to work on. She's been wonderful to work with on even another project that will come out later. So no, we have nothing planned, nothing in the works. But like you said, if Wyrmspan brings joy to a lot of people in a month or so, we're going to probably start thinking about doing something for it. But you never know, too. I've heard some people who seem worried that we might do Wyrmspan expansions because they've seen what happens with Wingspan, where they get really deep into it and they want everything. It's that I don't know if I don't really want to. I want to do what's right for most people, and so if that's a very small audience, I don't know. Have you heard that? Where people
I haven't seen
Yeah.
it with this, but I have it at
Yeah.
a personal level with Everdell and Everdell Farshore. I kind of have that, where I
Yeah.
have this giant big box of Everdell, and I love it all. And then I got Everdell Farshore, which I think is a really good standalone, similar, different game. And mentally, I've been like, I almost want to have the single box I pull out when I just want a base game, and I want to have the big box. But I also know myself, and if expansions come out, I'll probably get them. So I guess my initial reaction was kind of surprised at that. And I was like, no, I actually have that exact thing with a different game, so I get it.
Yeah. My hope right now, at least, is if we, like with Wingspan, we have a giant nesting box that's designed to hold all the Wingspan stuff because there's so much. My hope for Wyrmspan, maybe, and really this is just me talking out loud here, is that if we make more stuff for it, that we can fit everything into the box and that it isn't an expansion that, like, it's already a pretty complex game. We don't need to make it more complex. It would probably be a more stuff expansion, more caves, more dragons, more guilds. Mm-hmm. I think that's somewhat likely that could happen someday. And I don't think that dilutes the game too much or anything like that. And it all should fit in the box.
And then speaking of other, I guess, adjacencies, can we expect to see Wyrmspan on BGA, Steam, all the digital implementations? Wingspan has a huge digital presence, and I'm curious what that's going to look like for Wyrmspan.
Yeah, Monster Couch has done an amazing job with Wingspan Digital. I think a lot of people play it. There are like 4 different YouTube channels where people just talk about playing Wingspan Digital. And so I would love to work with Monster Couch on Wyrmspan. They, like everyone else, including yourself, I'm hoping to get a copy of Wyrmspan to you in the near future. We are waiting on the freight shipments to arrive. So in the US, they do to arrive in a few days. Europe is really slow right now due to a lot of things happening in Europe. So that'll take a little bit longer. But basically, as soon as I can send Monster Couch a copy, I'm hopeful that they will say, yes, we want to work on this.
Perfect. Well, I hope so. I think it's fascinating. It's a whole different conversation with digital implementations, but yeah. It's actually, speaking of which, it's a tangential question, but one that is literally just based off of a kind of a interesting question based on a blog post you had today. You're talking about, which is a random tangent, not Wyrmspan related, but you're talking about counterfeiting and things you can do to avoid counterfeiting. And one of the things you suggested was, not necessarily, you didn't suggest that you should do this, but to avoid counterfeiting, you're talking about having less of a digital presence of your games. And I thought that was interesting considering how much of a digital presence your games have.
Yeah. In the post, I call out Tabletop Simulator a little bit.
It's specific to that.
It is a little bit specific to them because with Tabletop Simulator, you can actually just download, like if a game has been uploaded on the Tabletop Simulator, you can download all those files too, and then you just have the files. So I would say Wingspan Digital is a little bit differently. Like the cards are formatted different. They don't look like Wingspan cards. They're kind of smaller, tighter. They're reorganized for the screen.
That makes sense. I was just curious because I know how strong of a digital presence. I know there are publishers who are against digital presences. There's always that discussion of, does it enhance the sales of your game? Does it enhance your game's presence? Does it dilute? Like, it's always an interesting conversation. But I just thought it was interesting seeing that there. But then past that, another thing I saw is I saw many people asking for like promo packs between the two. Are you gonna get Wingspan promo packs in Wyrmspan and vice versa? And you've been pretty firm that that's not happening. But like, not like a maybe. It's like nope, Wingspan's Wingspan, Wyrmspan's Wyrmspan. Why the firmness around it? I guess I'm curious.
That's a good question. Yeah, that's been maybe more of my instinctual response than something that I've intended to draw a hard line about. I think maybe right now part of the way I've responded has come from some of the confusion about Wyrmspan being just a reskin, even though there's a designer who spent a year of her life working on this game, and so I'm trying to maybe reinforce a little bit, maybe over the top, that these are 2 different games. One is inspired by the other, but they are different. The resources in Wyrmspan are different, but it would maybe be interesting to look at some of the birds that maybe inspired the dragons in Wyrmspan and find some overlap there. Like we have dragons that have feathers in Wyrmspan. So
yeah, it's interesting because I buy complete. Your answer makes complete sense. I was just looking at it more as like almost like a whimsical thing, and I was like, I know you've embraced whimsical things. Like you have, I think you have the Seattle Arch, and then your cat in many of your games.
Oh yeah. There's a cat dragon in Wyrmspan.
I was about to ask, is there an arch and a cat in Wyrmspan?
There's definitely a cat. Did we slip the arch in here? I'm trying to see if we put it on the back of the player mat. It's in one of the caves. There's an arch in one of the caves. Cool. Yeah.
Curious. I just wanted to make sure. I just remember those things. Because it lined hands in hands with like that whimsical nature, which I guess some people would be against. That's why I was more curious about it. And then on a slightly more personal note, what is your favorite, like, well, I probably should ask, which do you prefer, Wyrmspan or Wingspan?
Ooh. So I've played Wyrmspan obviously many times, but only twice with the final production copy. One was last week, one was with the pre-production copy, and it's really good. It's really, really good. That's hard to say. I think it might depend on the audience a little bit, but and maybe the playing time. Wyrmspan is going to be a little bit longer because you can actually earn new actions in Wyrmspan. In Wingspan, you are constrained to the actions that you have.
Is
So
it the
I think it
same
might
4 rounds of play?
the same 4 rounds of play, yeah, but
Decreasing actions?
no decreasing action. So you
Oh.
always get 6 action tokens and 1 egg at the beginning of each round. But there are ways that you can earn extra action tokens. So it can end up going over the. I think Wingspan has 26 total. You can end up going over that. What do
Fun.
you think, Alex? What do you, how do you, based on what you know so
Oh,
far, which one do you think you will be more
I
excited to play?
I assume Wyrmspan, but
Yeah.
Wingspan's always been a great game. Wyrmspan does seem to have that additional level of complexity, and both
Mhm.
like I've watched your full video breaking down the two, and again I'll link that down below if anyone wants a full breakdown. Like if you want a full like 25-minute deep dive of all the similarities and differences, highly recommend it. But yeah, from the things that you've added to Wyrmspan, I think it has that additional level of just bite to it that is interesting, and also like on a weird level, like particularly one of the things I'm more excited, which is why I called it out. Like I never liked the dice feeder personally. It always felt like
Ah,
this weird
yeah.
extra element. Like it didn't. It was randomness that to me didn't feel like it added value personally. And
Yeah.
again, it's a game that's worked
Yeah.
for many people. I'm not criticizing it. It's just more. But yeah, so I think Wyrmspan, but obviously I have to play it first. And what's your
Yeah.
favorite? What is your favorite? My original question was going to be, what's your favorite change from Wyrmspan to Wingspan to Wyrmspan?
My favorite change overall, yeah, because I talked about some of the differences, but the favorite change, the dice are probably up there. I like the aesthetic of the dice in the dice tower, but it can be frustrating not to get the food that you really need. Um, and it is how I'd probably go with the ability to get more actions. Like it feels really good. Like in any game where you get like an extra turn in the game, that to me always feels really good. And so I like that there
Yeah.
are ways to do that in Wyrmspan without it doesn't prolong the game too much. It just gives you a little boost every now and then that you earn an extra action or two. So that might be it. Yeah.
And I assume like a standard Stegmaier game, it's gonna be at least 1 to 5 players, or maybe more.
It is indeed 1 to 5
1 to 5
players. Yeah, it
players.
has a robust Automa solo mode in it, and
Oh,
then yeah,
do you have a quick start guide?
we for Automa or just like in general.
No, I can't remember the name for it. You had for Wingspan. You released after the first edition. You released a quick
Yes.
start.
Good memory. Yeah, we didn't have that in the original. What we have in Wyrmspan, I don't know if I have it handy here, but we have little quick start cards. So there's a card that says, here are things to potentially do on your first 4 turns, and then you flip it over, and it gives you some bullet points to think about on future turns. So it isn't, we tried to do it the way that we did it with Wingspan, but there are a lot more variables in play in Wyrmspan, where it made it a little bit more cumbersome to have something so specific. It's more like, think about this on your first turn, then your second turn, and so on.
Perfect. And then I guess I'll end with a question that's probably very relevant to all the people who are pre-ordering this or considering pre-ordering this.
Yeah.
When should people expect to start getting copies if they do go ahead and pre-order it?
Yeah, we're the freight shipments are on schedule, at least for every region except for Europe, to be ready for our January 31st launch. It'll be on our web store on January 31st. Shipping from the US, Canada, and Australia, then Europe throughout February. Depending on the number of orders, it might bleed over into March. And then in late March, we'll have our worldwide retail release. Most of the copies really are going to retailers, but we're hoping to sell some copies on our web store too if people want it early.
Perfect. And then your Stegmaier champions, that's the, I don't know the full terms of it, but it's if you're Stegmaier champion, I believe you get free shipping. Is there anything else?
Not free shipping. We used to do that.
Oh.
Now, some of our champions get 20% off the whole order. So they get 20% off shipping and 20% off the order, the price of the game and anything they put in there, because we have some like metal coins, wooden resources, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And they are
shirts that apparently have
prioritized.
spoilers for your games coming up.
Someone noticed the other day that our champion shirt from last year had a little dragon logo on it. That's spoiled.
Yeah, so if you go ahead and buy that shirt, you can go ahead and comb through all the rest of the icons and see what else is coming up or not coming up. Who knows?
That's
yeah,
right.
perfect. Well, thanks so much, Jamey. This has been absolutely delightful. I'm very excited for this. I'm very curious to see how it goes. Like again, as you can see from this, I diligently read all your stuff, watch all your stuff. I'm very up to date about just what's going on around this. And there's an entire, if you are someone who's interested in this game as well, it's worth noting there's an entire Facebook group already devoted to Wyrmspan that is incredibly active. So if this is something you're already excited for and you want an outlet for that, that's worth checking out. But yeah, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Alex. I really appreciate it.
And to everyone else, thank you and have a good one.